He arrived at the academy early that morning, carrying nothing but a faded backpack that had lost its brightness long ago. The straps had been repaired more than once, and the zipper no longer closed smoothly. Yet he held it close to his chest as if it carried something precious inside, something he could not afford to lose. His steps were slow and unsure as he entered the tall building, passing the glass doors that reflected a nervous boy who looked completely different from the confident and stylish students already waiting in the lobby. They stood in groups, laughing quietly and checking their reflections in their phone screens. His presence didn't fit the scene, and by the way some of them stared, he felt it deeply. He kept his eyes low while walking across the lobby, afraid that if he looked up, someone would ask him what he was doing there. Truthfully, even he wondered why he had come. The academy was famous for taking only the finest young artists, the ones who had been trained since childhood by tutors, and had grown up around grand pianos and private lessons. He didn't belong to that world. He came from a much smaller one, a world where the closest thing to luxury was an old upright piano with chipped paint, and keys that didn't respond half the time. Even so, that piano had become his whole life. He reached the registration table and quietly gave his information to the coordinator, who barely looked up from her papers. She handed him a number written on a small sticker. It was wrinkled, as if someone had already rejected it before he arrived. He placed it carefully on his shirt, smoothing it out even though his hands were shaking slightly. The coordinator pointed toward a hallway where the audition room was located. He nodded and walked away, feeling her eyes on him as if she was trying to guess how someone like him had ended up there. The hallway felt colder than the lobby. Each footstep echoed, and the sound made him even more self-conscious. He passed several posters displaying previous academy performers. Their elegant clothes, perfect posture, and glowing confidence made him feel even smaller. He wondered if anyone like him had ever walked through these halls, let alone been accepted. When he reached the waiting area outside the audition room, there were already more than 10 students seated on the chairs. Some practiced scales softly on portable keyboards they had brought along. Others warmed up their fingers in the air as if playing imaginary chords. A few simply chatted and laughed, speaking about the pieces they had prepared and the teachers who had trained them. He took the only empty seat at the end of the row. The moment he sat down, he felt a few eyes on him. One student whispered something to the person beside him, and both of them giggled under their breath. Another looked him up and down and smirked. He pretended he didn't notice, but his ears burned with embarrassment. He wished he could fold into himself, disappear into his old backpack, or slip out through the nearest door. But he stayed seated, hands clasped tightly together. He had promised himself he would at least try. A grand piano could be heard from inside the audition room. Someone was performing, and their melody floated through the hallway like warm light. The sound was rich, full of emotion, and technically perfect. A few students nodded in approval. Some murmured that they had taken classes with expensive tutors who trained them to play like that. He listened silently, not out of jealousy, but out of admiration. He loved hearing anyone play, even those far more skilled than him. Music never made him feel small. People did. When the performance ended, the soft murmur of the room returned. The door opened, and a student stepped out, looking proud and relieved. A small group congratulated him before he joined them. The director, a tall and serious-looking person with cold eyes, stood in the doorway and read out the next number. Every time the director's voice echoed through the hallway, everyone fell silent. The director carried an air importance, the type that made others sit straighter and hold their breath. The auditions continued like that. One after another, the students walked into the room, played their rehearsed pieces, and came out wearing either hopeful smiles or disappointed expressions. The boy watched all of them go, feeling the weight of nervousness pressing harder against his chest. Even though the room was comfortably heated, he felt cold. As he sat quietly, he clutched his backpack a little tighter. Inside it was a small notebook filled with sketches of music he had written growing up. None of it was perfect, but each note meant something to him. He didn't know if he would use it during the audition. He didn't even know whether the director would give him enough time to explain anything. Still, he brought it because it reminded him of why he played in the first place. He remembered the small community hall, where he practiced at night. The hall was unlocked for people who needed a quiet place to sit, but almost nobody visited. The old upright piano inside was ignored by everyone except him. He had discovered it after wandering around one evening, looking for a place where he could think. When he sat down and pressed the first key, even though it sounded out of tune, he felt something inside him open. From that moment, he returned night after night, practicing until his fingers were numb and the sound of broken keys felt like home. He didn't learn from books or teachers. He learned from listening, watching videos silently since he had no headphones, and practicing until his arms felt heavy. Mistakes were his teachers. The old piano was his guide, and music was the only place where he felt he mattered. A retired musician from the neighborhood eventually found him practicing and encouraged him to apply to the academy. At first, he refused. He wasn't good enough. He didn't know proper technique, and he certainly didn't have fancy clothes or money to travel frequently. But the musician insisted that raw talent had value and that the academy needed to hear someone like him. The boy had never believed it, but the encouragement stayed in his heart. Now, sitting in the academy hallway, surrounded by polished students, he doubted everything again. His number was still far down the list, and his hands felt colder with each passing minute. He listened as the director called out another number, and another student stood up confidently, smiling widely before entering the audition room. The boy wondered if anyone had ever felt this nervous before their turn. He wondered if those who laughed at him had any idea how much courage it took for him just to sit there. Another student across the room made eye contact with him for a moment, then quickly looked away and whispered to a friend. Laughter followed. The boy forced himself not to react. He stared at his shoes instead, noticing the worn corners and frayed stitching. He knew he would be judged the moment he stepped into the audition room, not for his music, but for how he looked. Still, a quiet determination lingered somewhere inside him. He hadn't come this far to walk away. He wanted, at least once in his life, to play on a real grand piano, to hear how his music sounded when the keys responded properly and the pedals were smooth. He wanted to know if all those nights of practicing alone meant something. Time passed slowly. The soft ticking of the wall clock felt louder than ever. One student walked past him to sharpen their posture before their turn. Another stretched their fingers dramatically, drawing attention. The boy simply breathed quietly, waiting. He remembered the musician's words from months ago. You don't have to look like everyone else. You just have to play like yourself. He repeated that line silently in his mind. The hallway suddenly fell quiet again. The door opened. The director stepped out with the same serious expression and called out the next number. It wasn't his number yet, but it was getting closer. His heart pounded. His palms felt sweaty. But he didn't move from his seat. He stayed there, holding his backpack, listening to the students whispering around him and the faint sound of the piano behind the closed door. He didn't know what would happen when his turn finally came. He didn't know if he would freeze, panic, or surprise himself. All he knew was that he had come this far with nothing but hope and discipline. Whatever waited behind that door would decide the rest of his day, maybe even the rest of his life. And though he felt small sitting among those who laughed at him, he also felt something else deep inside. Something quiet but steady. He felt ready, even if no one believed it yet. He sat in the waiting room with his hands still resting on the old backpack, but his mind was far away. While the others chatted and compared their music lessons, he drifted back to the memories that shaped him, memories that felt warm, even when life around him had been anything but easy. The quiet hallway of the academy faded, replaced by the simple home he grew up in. His childhood had never been filled with the things most kids around him had. There were no expensive toys, no perfectly decorated bedrooms, no trips to fancy places. The walls of his home were plain, the floors creaked, and the windows rattled on windy nights. Still, he remembered it with a sense of attachment, because in that space, he had learned how to dream. Though life was simple, he always felt a quiet strength in his home, a comfort that wrapped around him even when times were hard. He grew up without many material things, but he never complained. He saw how hard those around him worked to make sure he had what he needed. Their efforts shaped him. Their sacrifices became part of him. And though he didn't have everything other kids had, he had enough love around him to feel supported. That love was quiet, like a soft hand on his back, guiding him without pressure. When he was younger, he used to sit outside buildings that held community events or performances. He couldn't go inside, but he loved listening to the faint sounds coming through the windows. Sometimes he would hear a violin warming up. Other times it was a choir practicing. But the sound that always made him freeze in place was the piano. Something about it reached him in a way he couldn't explain. He remembered the first time he heard someone play a real piece on a piano. He had been walking near the community hall when the door was slightly open. A few notes slipped out into the air, and he stood completely still. He didn't know who was playing or what the piece was, but the sound ran straight through him. It felt warm and light, like sunlight touching his face after a long winter. He didn't move until the music stopped after that day. He returned to the hall every evening, standing outside just to hear even a few minutes of music. Sometimes the hall was empty, and he felt a little disappointed. But other days, someone practiced for hours, and he listened without blinking, memorizing every pattern, every rise and fall of the melody. Slowly, he began to hum the notes. Then he began tapping them out with his fingers on his knees. Soon, he could remember full melodies even days after hearing them. One night, he gathered enough courage to step inside the hall when it was empty. He pushed open the door quietly, expecting someone to shout at him or ask him to leave. But no one was there. The lights were dim, and the room felt bigger than he imagined. Then he saw it, the old upright piano standing against the far wall. It wasn't beautiful. In fact, it looked forgotten. The paint was peeling off the sides, and the bench wobbled. Some keys were chipped, and one corner of the wood had a deep crack. But to him, it felt like he was looking at something magical. He approached it slowly, almost afraid it would disappear if he moved too fast. Then he sat on the unsteady bench, placed his hands on the cool keys, and pressed down gently. The first sound that came out was a little off, slightly out of tune, but it still made his heart rise in his chest. He pressed another key, and another. Soon he began trying to play the melodies he had memorized from outside the hall. At first, the notes were clumsy and uneven. Some keys didn't work at all, forcing him to change parts of the melody. But with every mistake, he learned something new. With every wrong key, he gained a little more control. He practiced every night after that. Sometimes he stayed until his hands were cold, sometimes until his eyes felt heavy. The music stayed with him, even after he left the hall and walked home. He practiced the melodies in his mind, tapping them on the side of his bed as he drifted off to sleep. The piano became his escape, his companion, and the place where he felt more himself than anywhere else. People often assume that talent needs structure, lessons, and guidance. But he didn't have those things. What he had was curiosity, patience, and countless hours spent with an old piano that barely worked. He learned not by following rules, but by listening to his instincts. Instead of being taught how to play, he taught himself how to feel every note. There were moments when he doubted everything. Moments when he listened to trained musicians and felt like he could never reach their level. But music wasn't a competition for him. It wasn't about being the best. It was about expression, releasing emotions he didn't know how to speak. One evening, while he was practicing a piece he had created himself, a soft shuffle behind him made him jump. He turned quickly and saw an older man standing in the doorway, watching him. He froze on the bench, unsure if he was about to get scolded for using the piano without permission. But instead of anger, the man had a surprised expression. He stepped closer and said he had heard the boy playing from the hallway. He asked how long he had been learning. The boy's answer was simple. He didn't know how to explain that he wasn't really learning in the traditional sense. He just played. He played because he needed to. The older man didn't judge him. Instead, he asked him to play again. Nervous but trusting, the boy placed his hands on the keys and played the piece he had been practicing earlier. When he finished, the man nodded slowly, a thoughtful look in his eyes. From that day on, the man started visiting the hall more often. He never forced the boy to play a certain way or follow any strict rules. Instead, he gave him small tips, gentle guidance, and occasional encouragement. The man told him that talent didn't always come from lessons, sometimes it came from the heart. And the boy's heart, he said, spoke loudly through the piano dot. It was the man who told him about the academy. The boy had laughed at first, thinking the idea was impossible. The academy was for people who grew up in perfect homes with perfect training. Not someone who had learned on a broken piano at night while everyone else was asleep. But the man insisted. He said the boy had something rare, something raw and genuine. He said the academy wouldn't find many students like him, someone who had shaped their own path without being pushed. Someone who understood music not as a task, but as a feeling. Still, the boy hesitated. He doubted himself. His clothes were simple. His shoes were warm. His fingers didn't move the same way trained students' fingers did. But the man gently reminded him that talent didn't care about clothes or status. It cared about passion. So the boy agreed to apply, though his heart was filled with uncertainty. He didn't expect acceptance. He didn't expect applause. He only wanted a chance to play on a real piano, one that didn't have broken keys or chipped paint. He remembered the day he received the letter from the academy. His hands trembled as he opened it. When he read the words inviting him to audition, he didn't know whether to feel excited or scared. It felt unreal. He had spent years playing in secret, never imagining anyone outside his neighborhood would hear him. He practiced harder than ever after that, using every moment he could. The old piano continued to be his teacher, its flaws sharpening his skill rather than weakening it. He learned to adapt, to push through broken keys, to rely on both feeling and discipline. Now, sitting in the academy hallway with others who had been trained their whole lives, he felt the pressure of everything he had come from. The giggles and quiet whispers from the other students didn't surprise him. He didn't blame them. They had grown up differently. They lived in a world of polished keys and tutors. They couldn't imagine someone learning the way he had, but he reminded himself why he was there. He wasn't there to prove anyone wrong. He wasn't there to shine or impress. He was there because music had given him a place to belong. And if this was his chance to grow, he didn't want fear to take it away. He looked down at his hands. They weren't perfect. They were slightly rough, shaped by years of practice on uneven keys. But those hands had created melodies that carried his memories, his feelings, his story. As the audition numbers continued to be called, he kept thinking about the old hall, the broken piano, and the quiet encouragement he had received. Every moment had led him here. And though the academy felt like a different world, he knew one thing for certain. Music had brought him this far, and it would carry him through whatever came next. The hallway had grown even quieter by the time his number was getting close. The students who had arrived full of confidence were now shifting in their seats, some whispering nervously, others tapping their feet to release tension. Each time the door to the audition room opened, everyone paused for a moment, watching the person who stepped out. Some left with bright eyes and small smiles. Others walked out with stiff shoulders, trying not to show disappointment. He sat at the far end of the line, watching, listening, and trying to control the uneasy feeling inside his chest. He had not spoken a single word since arriving. He didn't know what he would say, even if someone talked to him. His mind was too full of thoughts, too full of doubt, too full of hope. He could hear a performance happening inside the room. The melody was quick and technical, filled with fast runs and sharp notes. The kind of piece trained students mastered after years of guided practice. A few students in the waiting area nodded in appreciation. One of them said it was a piece often taught in advanced lessons. Another added that the director loved this kind of music. Their voices made him feel even smaller. He lowered his head and let his thoughts drift to the quiet nights at the old community hall. The piano there hadn't been able to play quick notes cleanly. Some keys stuck if you pressed them too fast. That forced him to play slowly at first, then gradually adjust his hands in a way that felt natural rather than technical. Without even meaning to, he had developed his own style. But would that matter here? Would the director appreciate something different? Or would he see only mistakes? He heard laughter again, soft but sharp enough to catch his attention. A group of students had shifted their gaze toward him. One of them whispered something while glancing at his warm shoes and old backpack. Another giggled. Though they tried to hide it, he felt every sound like a pinprick. He kept staring at his hands, trying not to react. He didn't want anyone to think he was bothered. But inside, his chest tightened. He wondered if he looked as nervous as he felt. He wondered if everyone else, even those who laughed, had their own fears hidden behind confident faces. Maybe they did. Or maybe they had been trained to feel at home in places like this, places with shiny floors and quiet halls. The audition room door opened again. A student walked out with a proud smile. The director stepped into the hallway, silent for a moment as he checked the next number on the list. His expression didn't change at all. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply stood like a tall, quiet figure who expected the best from those in front of him. He called the next number. A girl with perfect posture stood, smoothed her hair, and walked inside gracefully. The door closed behind her. The hallway returned to low whispers. As time passed, the boy felt the walls closing in a little. His heart beat steadily, but too fast. His throat felt dry. He tried to breathe slower, deeper, but the air felt heavy. He reminded himself that he had been through tougher moments before. He had played on cold nights when his fingers were stiff, when the piano keys stuck so often that he had to force melodies out of them. If he could handle that, he could handle this. But this time, he wasn't alone. That made it harder. He could feel the judgment in the room. He could sense the glances. He could hear the giggles that weren't loud, but loud enough. The girl inside finished her performance. The director stepped out again. Another number was called. It wasn't his. But now there were only a few numbers left before his turn. His fingers trembled slightly. He rubbed them together, hoping the movement would calm him. He looked at the grand piano inside the room each time the door opened. Just seeing the edge of it made his heart lift a little. That piano wasn't like the one in the community hall. Its keys were polished. Its frame was smooth and shining under the lights. Its sound would be rich and full, not broken or uneven. He wanted to play it. More than anything, He wanted to feel how his music sounded on something real, but he also feared it. What if he touched those perfect keys and froze? What if his confidence disappeared the moment he sat down? What if the director heard only flaws? The whispers around him continued. One student kept glancing at him, then at his backpack. Another whispered again and covered her mouth while laughing. A third student looked at him openly, as if trying to understand what he was doing there. He kept his expression calm, but inside the doubt grew. Finally, there were only 2 students left before him. The hallway felt tense. Everyone was quieter now, even those who had been confident earlier. The sound of the piano inside the room was softer this time, slower, filled with emotion. The student performing now seemed to be playing with feeling rather than speed. The boy leaned forward slightly, listening closely. He liked the melody. He liked how it rose gently and then fell like a soft sigh. It reminded him of nights when he had played his own pieces in the empty hall, trying to let go of the weight on his heart. Music had always been the only place where he could speak without words. The performance ended. The director stepped out once more. He checked the next number dot this time. The student beside him stood and walked inside. Now it was just him. He was the last one waiting. His heartbeat grew louder in his ears. He felt each thump clearly. His hands were cold again. He rubbed them on his pants quietly. Without thinking, he touched the pocket of his backpack. Inside it was the small notebook filled with melodies and ideas he had written late at night. He didn't know if he would show it to the director. Probably not. It wasn't perfect, but he carried it everywhere because it held pieces of him. The student who had gone inside a moment ago began playing. Their piece was confident, filled with strong chords and smooth transitions. It sounded elegant, the kind of music people expected to hear from trained students. He listened quietly, admiring it, but also feeling the pressure growing inside him. The whispers in the hallway had died down. Everyone else had already auditioned. A few students still waiting for their feedback stood at the far end of the hall, but they barely looked in his direction now. The hallway felt too empty. When the last performance ended, the silence felt thick. The boy's heart thudded so loudly, he was afraid someone might hear it. Then the door opened. The director stepped out again, standing tall and unreadable as always. He looked at his paper, then at the boy. He called his number. For a moment, the boy couldn't move. His legs felt stuck to the floor. His breath caught in his throat. He felt the weight of every doubt, every whisper, every giggle. But then he remembered the broken piano, the old hall, and the patient encouragement of the man who had believed in him. He remembered the cold nights of practice, the melodies he had created from his own emotions, and the quiet strength music had given him. He stood. The hallway felt longer than before as he took his first step. His legs were shaky, but he kept walking. The director waited inside the room, holding the door open slightly. The boy didn't look at anyone around him. He kept his eyes straight ahead. The moment he stepped through the doorway, he felt the world change. The room was bright, calm, and filled with a quiet air of expectation. A grand piano stood at the center, its surface shining under the soft lights. The director pointed to the bench without speaking. The boy walked slowly toward the piano, feeling each step in his chest. He sat on the bench, trying to steady his hands. The room felt huge. His heart beat fast. The silence stretched around him. He placed his fingers on the keys. Behind him, the director waited. The students outside whispered among themselves. The hallway behind the door still held laughter. But here, in this room, it was just him and the piano. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of everything settle. Then he took a breath. He was ready to play. The news of the boy's talent spread through the mansion faster than anyone expected. Some of the workers whispered about it in the halls, surprised that someone so quiet could play in such a powerful way. Others simply smiled when they passed him, as if proud of something they didn't fully understand. Yet even with all the attention, he stayed calm. He spent his mornings helping his mother with chores, and his evenings in the little corner where the old piano stood, touching the keys like they were something living. The lady of the mansion, however, had grown restless. She kept replaying the moment in her mind when the boy had silenced everyone with a song that was not meant for him to play. She hadn't planned for things to unfold that way. She had only wanted to prove a point, maybe show that the son of a maid should know his place. But when the tune filled the room and the guests stared at him with stunned faces instead of amusement, it had struck her pride. She felt challenged without anyone actually saying a word. So the next afternoon, when she found the boy walking across the garden, carrying a small basket of folded linens, she decided to speak to him. Her voice came out smooth, but there was a sharp edge under the surface. She asked him to bring the linens to one of the guest rooms and to return when he was done. He nodded, unsure why she wanted to see him again. When he came back, she was standing near the piano with her arms crossed. She didn't smile. Instead, she asked him to play again. He hesitated for a moment, but she reminded him that he was under her roof and should listen when she spoke. So he sat at the piano, placed his fingers on the keys, and let the melody flow. This time he chose something soft, almost like a whisper, something that might calm the tension between them. But she didn't seem calm. She walked in slow steps behind him, watching the way his hands moved, studying him as if trying to understand what she had missed the first time. When he finished, she tapped her fingers against the side of the piano and asked him where he had learned to play like that. He explained he had never taken lessons. He had only listened whenever the older workers or rare guests played, memorizing the sounds and figuring things out little by little. Her brows rose. She had expected a different answer, maybe something about secret practice or hidden training. But hearing that he learned by ear made her even more uneasy. It made her realize that his gift was real and not something she could easily dismiss or control. Later that evening, she called one of her close friends, someone who often visited the mansion for social gatherings. She told her about the boy, his mother, and the unexpected talent she had witnessed. Her friend laughed at first, thinking it was some exaggerated story. But when she realized the lady was serious, curiosity sparked in her voice. She asked if she could hear him play sometime. Word spread. Soon, more people wanted to hear this young musician who came from the staff quarters. The lady hadn't expected this. What she thought would be a one-time moment of embarrassment for the boy had turned into something she could no longer stop. But instead of letting the situation run wild, she decided to shape it to her own advantage. The next day, she approached the boy's mother while she was washing dishes. The woman froze when she saw the lady standing in front of her. It wasn't common for her to show up in the kitchen unless something serious had happened. The lady told her she wanted the boy to perform at an upcoming afternoon gathering where important guests would be present. The mother didn't know what to say. She had never been part of something like that, and she didn't know how her child would feel about it. The boy listened from the doorway. He understood that the lady wasn't asking for permission. She was telling them what was going to happen. Still, he didn't want to make trouble for his mother. So he stepped forward and said he would do it. The lady nodded, satisfied, and left the room. His mother turned to him with worried eyes. She asked him if he was sure. He said yes, even though he wasn't. He had always liked playing the piano, but not like this, not with people staring and expecting something from him. That evening, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, thinking about how things were changing so quickly. What if he made mistakes while playing? What if the guests laughed? What if the lady used his performance to make him feel small again? The doubts crowded his mind one after another, But then he remembered the way the music had filled the mansion during that first moment. He remembered how everything had gone quiet, how even the lady herself had stopped speaking. That memory was enough to give him courage. The day of the gathering arrived. Workers moved around the mansion, preparing trays of fruit, cleaning the hall, arranging seats, and polishing glass surfaces until they shone. The boy helped with some tasks until his mother told him to rest before the event. When he walked past the piano, he felt a strange pull toward it. He placed his hand on the wooden surface and closed his eyes. It was almost like greeting an old friend. When the guests began arriving, the lady introduced him as a special part of the afternoon. Some people looked surprised, others intrigued. He could hear small whispers behind fans and glasses. He tried not to let it distract him. Finally, the lady gave him a small nod, signaling that it was time. His heart pounded as he stepped toward the piano. He sat down, took a deep breath, and let his fingers touch the keys. The first note rang out. Then the next. Slowly the melody began to build. It was not something he had practiced for days. It was something new, something he created in that moment, based on the feelings he had bottled up for so long. The uncertainty, the pressure, the dreams, the fear, the quiet hope that maybe he could be more than people expected. The room grew still again. Even the lady didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, but this time something was different. She wasn't looking at him with annoyance or suspicion. She was watching with a kind of disbelief, as if realizing she had misjudged not just his talent, but him as a person. The music rose and fell like waves. Some of the guests leaned forward, almost forgetting to breathe. One of them wiped their eyes without thinking. Another placed a hand on their chest, as if the sound touched something deep inside. When he finished, there was a moment of pure silence. Then the applause came. Soft at first, then louder, filling the room with warmth he had never experienced before. His mother stood in the back, her hands pressed together, her eyes shining. The lady clapped as well. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was genuine, though she didn't quite understand why she felt that way. Something about the boy's music had opened a door inside her that she didn't know was there. After the performance, several guests approached him, asking how he learned to play, praising his skill, telling him he had a natural gift. He thanked them quietly, still unsure how to handle such attention. The lady watched all of this from a distance. Her friend leaned over and whispered that she had discovered something extraordinary. The lady didn't answer. She only stared at the boy, thinking about all the things she had believed before, and how quickly those beliefs were crumbling dot as the gathering came to an end and the guests said their farewells. The boy stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. A garden looked peaceful, with the last light of afternoon giving everything a soft glow. He finally allowed himself to breathe. Behind him, the lady walked out of the doorway. He heard her steps and turned around. She looked at him for a long moment, then said that he had played beautifully. Her tone carried something he had never heard from her before, something almost gentle. He thanked her, unsure if she meant it. But then she added that the performance might open new opportunities for him. She didn't explain what that meant, and he didn't ask. All he knew was that everything was changing again. And this time, he hoped the changes would lead somewhere brighter, not just for him, but for his mother as well. The sun rose gently over the mansion the next morning, touching everything with a soft glow. The boy woke earlier than usual. His mind was still full of the applause from the night before, the warmth of the guests' smiles, and the strange, unexpected calm in the lady's voice when she spoke to him afterward. It felt like a dream, but a real one, the kind that stays with a person even after they open their eyes. His mother watched him quietly as he sat at the small table in their room. She could tell he was thinking deeply. She asked if he was nervous about anything. He shook his head, though he wasn't entirely sure. He admitted that he was surprised by how kind everyone had been, especially because none of this had ever been part of his life before. She smiled and told him that sometimes life changes in ways people don't expect, and often those changes begin with courage. Her words comforted him, even though his thoughts were still tangled with uncertainty. A few hours later, while he was helping carry a stack of folded towels across the hallway, one of the older workers stopped him. With a proud grin, the man told him that his performance had been the best moment the mansion had seen in a very long time. The boy thanked him shyly. Compliments still felt strange, but they warmed him all the same as the day went on. More workers stopped him with small comments, some about his skill, others simply expressing how moved they had felt listening to him play. It was as if the whole place had awakened. The walls felt less heavy, the rooms less silent, the air lighter, but not everyone responded the same way. The lady, who had started all of this without meaning to, was quieter than usual. She hardly spoke during breakfast and spent long moments staring out the window, lost in thought. Even her closest staff noticed the change in her. Though no one dared to ask why in the early afternoon, she sent someone to call the boy to the main hall. He walked in carefully, unsure what to expect. She was seated near the piano, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She asked him to sit. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it wasn't soft either. It carried something in between something thoughtful. She began by saying that she had been thinking a lot since the gathering. She admitted she had not expected him to play with such depth or emotion. She had assumed he would freeze under pressure. She had assumed the guests would laugh politely and move on. She paused, then said quietly that she had been wrong. The boy didn't know what to say, so he simply listened. Then she continued, telling him that one of the guests from the previous day had called that morning. The guest wanted to recommend him to someone important, a director of a well-known music program in the city. The lady explained that this director often visited schools, concerts, and events searching for young talent. And now, because of his performance, the director wanted to meet him. The boy blinked, confused. He wasn't sure he heard correctly. He asked if she meant the director wanted to hear him play. She nodded. His heart began to pound. He had never met any director, much less someone connected to a music program. The idea scared him, but at the same time, something inside him felt bright, like a spark that had been waiting for a moment like this. The lady added that she would arrange everything. The director planned to visit the mansion the next morning. The boy was shocked. So soon? She nodded again and said the director preferred to hear talent in its natural environment, rather than on a stage. After telling him this, she stood and walked toward the door. Before she left, she said something surprising. She told him that whatever happened, he should remember that his music mattered. She didn't explain what she meant, but the words stayed with him. That night, the boy couldn't keep still. He walked around the small room, humming short melodies, imagining how the meeting would go. His mother told him to rest, but she said it with a soft smile, knowing exactly why he couldn't. When morning finally came, the mansion buzzed with quiet anticipation. The lady ordered the hall to be cleaned again, even though it already sparkled. She told the workers to prepare tea and fresh fruit for the guest. Everything had to be perfect. The boy waited near the piano, his fingers trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. His mother stood near the doorway, her expression calm, but her hands clasped tightly. Then the director arrived. He was a tall man with gentle eyes, dressed simply but neatly. He greeted the lady politely before turning to the boy with an encouraging smile. He introduced himself and said he had heard many things about the unexpected performance that had taken place. He told the boy he was eager to hear him play. The boy nodded, though his mouth felt dry. He took his seat at the piano. The director stood a few steps away, watching with quiet interest. The boy placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply, trying to steady himself. Then he began. He didn't choose a familiar tune. He didn't choose something simple or something grand. Instead, he played something honest, something that reflected everything he had felt over the past few days. The pressure, the fear, the excitement, the hope, the sudden shift in his world. The melody rose softly, building like a story. The director watched closely, his expression shifting from interest to awe. The lady watched too, though she kept her hands folded to hide how tightly she was gripping them. When the boy finished, silence filled the room again. A soft, warm silence. The director exhaled slowly, almost like he had forgotten to breathe during the performance. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the piano, not touching the boy, but steadying himself. He told the boy that he had something rare, something that could not be taught in any school or program. He said the boy's music carried truth, the kind of truth that made people stop and listen even against their will. Then he made an offer. He invited the boy to join his music program in the city. He said it would not cost the family anything. He would personally ensure the boy received the training, guidance, and opportunities he deserved. The boy's eyes widened. He turned to his mother, who covered her mouth with both hands, trying not to cry. The lady watched them, her expression softening in a way the workers had never seen. The boy accepted. The director smiled, promising to return soon with all the details. He said he believed the boy had a future that could touch countless hearts. After he left, the mansion felt different again. The workers congratulated the boy as he walked through the halls. Some patted his shoulder. Others simply smiled proudly. His mother hugged him tightly the moment they were alone. She whispered that no matter where he went, she would be right behind him, cheering him on. The lady approached him later that afternoon. She didn't raise her chin the way she usually did. Instead, she looked at him as an equal. She said she hoped he would make the most of this opportunity. She said he had shown her something she had forgotten long ago, that real talent could come from anywhere. The boy thanked her sincerely. She nodded, then walked away quietly. As the day ended, he returned to the piano one more time. He sat down, placed his hands on the keys, and let a gentle melody fill the empty hall. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was peaceful. Soft notes drifted upward, touching the high ceiling, the long curtains, the polished floor, and the very walls that had witnessed so much. The lady paused at the top of the staircase. Listening. His mother stood in the doorway, smiling, and for the first time, the boy felt truly ready for whatever came next. His journey had begun with quiet footsteps across a mansion floor. But now, his music was leading him toward a brighter world, one that he had never imagined, but one he was finally ready to reach.